nother state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the state.
Welcome to the Black Miss Podcast. See, there it is.
Hey, yo, welcome to the Black Miss Podcast.
That was fake out.
Yes.
We back. Welcome to Black Miss Podcast. Welcome to Black Miss Podcast. It's your boy Ryan, aka Bishop. We got my boy Terrell. What's your AKA name, Terrell?
Nightcrawler.
All right, Cam.
I'm here as Storm.
All right, and of course we got Magneto, 2 Black, and we're gonna be doing an episode on X-Men.
Bad
and
analogies.
More specifically,
even though 2 Black is definitely Wolverine, but it's okay.
bruh. I think
wow.
You probably changed the name to Wolverine. But anyway, today on Black Miss Podcast, we will be doing a myth on Professor X Magneto being based off of MLK and Malcolm X.
Okay.
Not real.
So yeah, thanks for that. It has been a while. I guess we haven't really actually all been on here since like January.
Been a
lot going on. So first, congratulations to Miss Gold or Mrs. because she gets mad when I say Miss.
Put the Mrs. in there, you know.
Mrs. Golden.
Mrs. Golden.
Shout out. I was actually present for the wedding. I already shouted you out on the ones I've been doing, but since you're here, happy for you. Shout out.
If you can lift your hand up.
2 months in. So I didn't wear it. I just wore my band today because I didn't want to hear all of y'all in the comments. But I got a band now.
Oh my God, you see that rock on her hand? Oh my God. Look at Cam.
So yes.
But yeah, it feels good. You know, the first 6.5 months of this year have sucked a lot, and my wedding has been the only bright spot so far. And so I'm very excited about that. It's lovely.
It was a dope wedding. Shout out to the harp. The harp is the most underrated part of that wedding for people who don't know.
Terrell's got this baby cooking.
Oh, we're gonna go back to that. There was a harpist there.
Oh yeah, there was.
Yes.
There was.
Bougie niggas.
All right. So yeah, Professor X and Magneto are based off the myth, based off MLK, Malcolm X. Like we always do. What were people's thoughts? I will say I had been hearing this for a long time, and I even remember reading articles about it. I've been hearing this at least since college. It made sense to me when I didn't know any better. And then when I actually sat down, like everything else in the show, when you sat down and think about it and go over it, it's actually not close at all, and it needs to die. But we're trying to do something, so we've been doing a lot of really deep dive myths this year, a little more lighthearted, but this probably won't be lighthearted either. So we tried though. But anyway, what did anybody else think upon doing the research? The research was not nearly as rigorous though for y'all coming into this one compared to others.
No, I mean, like you said, when I first heard about this myth, I didn't really think too deeply into it. But as I got older, and then you approached me with the idea for this episode, I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Because I mean, knowing the two figures, I feel like to compare it with these comic book heroes, these comic book figures, kind of flattens Malcolm and Martin, and it kind of just is really a mischaracterization on both of their parts. It's really kind of just limiting, and then it's really I mean, it's just inaccurate. It's flattening. It's a mischaracterization of them both, and yeah, it just needs to stop.
I think the first time I heard about it might have been in college. Black probably one that told me.
Dear God. I'm sorry.
No. Probably one that told me it was a myth.
Oh, I thought you. I was like, I told you. Yeah. I mean, but it has the vibe of that thing that you, when you want to sound smart, that you tell a nigga like, hey, did you know that Magneto, Professor X was really based off Malcolm X and Martin Luther King? Like, it's got that fake smart nigga vibe. It's got that kind of vibe to it. But...
Yeah, well, the three of these niggas are all nerds and love comics and whatnot. And
And what are you?
I'm just not a comic book nerd. I'm still a nerd,
Okay.
just not a comic book nerd. I have only seen the X-Men in movies. I mean, my cousins and them, of course, were all watching the cartoons and stuff as kids, but it was never really my biggest jam. I very much enjoy the movies though. Um, and so I think I probably only heard this in passing, and it might have actually been in uni when somebody was trying to be smart and, hey, you know this, da, 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 da. But when you think about it, when you look at it, I just was like, there's no way that this would have gotten as big as it is and for as long as it is if it was actually about both of these people. It just what I just was like,
Just
that sounds really lovely, but white people was not about to let that fly. What? Even with us, I've seen the
No.
movies and I know enough about both characters even before coming into this research to understand how the dots were connected in that way. But like y'all have already said, it kind of is very like it's a moot point because when you really take a more analytical approach at the wholeness of who Malcolm and Martin were, as well as like the totality of both of these characters, it's just not giving that at all.
and when
So yeah,
you
I was just no.
yeah, when you watch like, cause I would do a thing preparing where I would like watch a cartoon or watch the movie, and then I would go watch a speech and see if I got any vibes, and they're not even close. Like Malcolm X talking about Malcolm X and Magneto, like so Malcolm X is supposed to be like, I'm gonna take over the world today or something. Like it just doesn't even, you know. But we'll get to that. But for those who are not comic book heads, we will give you the baseline. So if you don't know nothing about X-Men or you're like Cam, you only watch like 2 movies, it don't feel like we're gonna nerd out in a way where you can't follow. So don't
Yes,
worry
they
about
are. They
that.
are just a little bit. And I've seen more than 2 movies. Thank you very much.
3. Uh
All the Wolverines count.
no, we're not even gonna mention those movies. So
Okay, whatever. I've seen enough.
those are, except for Logan, that was good. Other rest are just yeah. Um but
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
but so yeah, real quick, patrons, we just had uh I don't know. I actually still have one more episode to put out before this one comes out, but for now, Tafari, because it's gonna say Tafari because I don't want to mess your last name up. So shout out to Tafari and did Damian Rodriguez. So we've been getting a few every week. So because we just posted an
Thank
episode,
you.
so thank you. Um, so yeah, we're gonna do a monologue real quick, and then we're gonna give y'all just kind of build out the universe for those people who don't know none of this shit, or maybe don't even know Malcolm X and King. I don't know how you watch our show and don't know those people, but hey, you might be new. So we got you. Back in my obsessive binge watching days when I used to finish entire series of shows in a day or two, y'all, if all of y'all know me for a while, y'all know I used to be me. I would literally like wake up at 3 or stay up till 3 when the show dropped and be one of the first people in the world to finish a show, like the whole season. So back in those times, my good friend Z would always clown me about my incessant need to compare nearly every show to another. She said I would never let anything just be what it was. I couldn't just let it stand on its own, let it stand alone. Every show I discussed with her had to be in comparison to another show I had just binged. Ozarks had to be compared to Breaking Bad. House of Cards had to be compared to Scandal. Fuck both of those shows, by the way. The Sopranos had to be compared to Mad Men. According to Z, nothing was allowed to just exist on its own. And looking back, she was honestly fair and it was right to probably clown me for this. Of course, all life exists in relationship to each other, but she was never denying that fact. I believe her point was and still is that just because we or the things we enjoy have similarities or exist in analogous to each other should not mean that they lack intrinsic nature or character. In fact, we can't understand the relationship that the pieces of life have to each other if we don't understand their own internal makeup. This failure to identify the independent character of people and things is in part how we end up with poorly constructed analogies and comparisons. Of course, Power is not The Wire. I don't know why anyone ever thought that. Of course, Chris Brown is not and never was the new Michael Jackson. Now, granted, this exercise to clumsily compare mildly proximal things may generally seem harmless when we're just talking about pop culture commodities. I can forgive my misguided co-hosts for their cult-like devotion to iPhones or over Androids, or Cam for being Team Black over Team Green on House of Dragon, or Terrell's just generally poor choice of music. But these these corny, misguided comparisons don't determine the value of our material lives anyway. So I mean, who cares, right? It's just all fun and jokes. The problem is many of us have been conditioned to judge nearly everything in the same fashion that we judge our taste in these commodities. Our political choices of candidates is compared to how well they can run a business. Our taste in a significant other is diminished to corporate talk like high value men and boss bitches. The political disagreements between some of our fiercest Black leaders is analogously reduced to rap beef, or in today's episode, fucking comic book characters. This is one of those tricks of capitalism. It takes our fairly innocent comparisons of life and flattens them all into commodities. Marketing slogans become confused as political aspirations of the people. This is how a movie like X-Men First Class, this is a true story, could market the relationship of Professor X and Magneto as being analogous to Dr. King and Malcolm X, all while the U.S. military purchased ads for the movie that clip real life soldiers in combat juxtaposed next to X-Men to boost military recruitment with the message,
heroes, ordinary people who discover they can do extraordinary things.
It need not matter that Dr. King opposed militarism or the Vietnam War, or that Malcolm X was so hated by the CIA that they likely poisoned him. Under this market logic, nothing exists on its own. Everything must exist in its relationship to capitalists and profits. My friend Z is no Marxist, but her point is well taken. If we do not acknowledge people and or the things for what they are, then we fail to appreciate or understand them. Taking a step further, we can be swept into whatever confusion capitalism offers when we fail to adapt this point. Thus, maybe sometimes life just is. No need to force it or gas it up by the artificial connections of the market. We can read our comics and watch our movies, but maybe we shouldn't expect anything else. Thank you. See, that was short.
Yeah, who said Power is just like The Wire? I just want to talk.
That's wild. That's
I-
a wild.
That's been on the internet. It's been on there.
That's crazy.
And it's
First of
probably
all.
been spoken in people's real homes. I don't know
It's
why.
from people who
I've
didn't
seen-
watch The Wire.
I've
I've
seen
seen people say, at least say, like, The Shy feels like The Wire.
And that's just a
And that's
shameful.
also bad.
Yeah.
But I at least can see where that reach can happen. But I think that's something that's so interesting because from a psychological level, humans are used to placing things in categories. It is like it's a part of your human nature. It is why for some people the pushback in regards to so many different things is just from a space of like not knowing how to categorize them.
Good point.
And
Yeah.
that is innate. But the problem then becomes when, like you said, we can't see those separations. And even when thinking of something as simple as TV shows, the shows wouldn't be successful unless there was something that actually separated them from the other things, because then it would just be the same storyline over and over and over and over again. Grey's Anatomy can go on for so long because the core of it is the same, but they add different things to where 18 seasons in, you're still hooked. But Grey's Anatomy will never be House. House will never be Our Grandma's General Hospital and All My Children. Like, there's parallels that we can pull from every single one of these things, like Scandal and House of Cards and all of those things. But unless there was something to distinctly keep them separated, we as individuals wouldn't even be interested.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point. That's why I like the tendency to try to force these comparisons. I think just even beyond the deeper capitalist stuff, just as a viewer, it kind of diminishes the experience if you need
it makes
to
sense why
always be.
myths are so easily perpetuated, right? And spread throughout, because so many of them, when just saying it out loud or hearing it, it makes sense, in finger quotes for just listeners. Because when you say Black don't crack and you see Black people all the time and they look amazing, and the stereotypes that we're all strong and we can handle all of these things. And we know that during slavery, we were forced to do backbreaking work, but we were still able to do it and thrive and all of these things. Then of course we end up with hospital disparities where they don't see our pain. Of course it ends up with all these myths that we don't get sick, or that we don't need the COVID vaccine, or that all of these things, because when you hear it and you see the things that have taken place, you're like, oh, that makes sense in my brain.
Yeah, on the
When you take
surface, yeah.
Yeah, but when you take
Yeah.
a step back and you're really looking at it, you're like, that shit never made sense actually.
No, you're definitely right. And given and piggyback off of both of what Black and Cam said, capitalism, the fact that things are so concerned with a market-driven society, it also diminishes the art. So you have kind of like Cam said, Scandal, House of Cards, but then you have something like the Oval, which is a Tyler Perry film that's kind of just trying to be in the same vein of those two.
And it's
right?
just literally, like you said, trying to tap into a trend. It's like you wouldn't even make
Exactly.
you're out of your depth.
Exactly. And he's trying so hard to copy these two shows that are already famous, already kind of laid the groundwork for that. Even before that, West Wing, but obviously the quality is not there because a lot of creators are so concerned with the profit and trying to make money and trying to get into, like you said, a trend, and it diminishes the art, and the forced comparisons happen. But really, like Cam said, you need the distinctions. You need to understand what is good art, what is not good art, what is market driven, very substanceless, very no like zero calorie, empty calorie as a compared to a full meal,
Right.
And I always say, like, we know that there's only so much that all of our brains can handle at one time. And we know that we're not all sitting here for hours on end every day, every time we hear something, trying to go on a deep dive to understand it all. But like we've always said, the problem becomes when it's not just one person choosing to accept the surface level answer. Once these things become widespread and they continue to be perpetuated in this way, then it actually has larger negative impacts, whether that is politically, culturally, financially. And so it's our job to constantly break those myths and to just make sure that y'all understand the same thing. So we're all not out here just saying stuff. Black even said earlier, he was like, I probably was walking around saying this shit at one time.
Like every other myth. Well, not everyone, but many of them. So, but yeah, I mean, it's just, that was what I was trying to, because I was just trying to think how to kind of frame this. But yeah, I was just thinking about, remember Z used to get on me for that. And it wasn't, she would just say it kind of casually, but it's true. Like you get kind of trained to think about things like that. And like I said, it doesn't seem like that deep when you're arguing about LeBron versus Jordan or something. Like it's not that deep, but if you conceive of like real shit like that, and which many people do, then it starts to blur lines, and that's what capitalism tends to do. So on to, just to give y'all, for those who might be, y'all got the kind of philosophical breakdown, but for those, so you can follow the rest of this episode, we give you a little baseline of who the characters are in this and what we're talking about. So we're talking about X-Men. We're really going to mainly just focus on two characters from X-Men, but other characters may come up. But the X-Men on a very basic level is just originally comes from a comic book strip of a rotating ensemble of mutants born with superhuman powers. They were called mutants. They were led by Professor X, who we'll get to. It's created in 1963 by writer Stan Lee. If you watch any Marvel movie up until he died, he made an appearance in nearly every one, even before the Marvel Universe. And then Jack Kirby was the artist. Some of the names I'm about to say you may have heard: Cyclops, Iceman, Beast, Archangel, Marvel Girl, more so known as Jean Grey or Phoenix or Dark Phoenix, Wolverine, Banshee, Storm, Colossus, Rogue, Sunfire, Kitty Pryde, etc. And there's way more than that. That's just giving y'all some rundown. The movies botched some of these characters, some of them they did well. And that's another thing about this is there's comics, there's movies, there's video games, there's multiple cartoons, there's prequel movies. So when you're thinking about these characters, they're not really like one thing. They often switch up based upon who's writing them and what form they're being written about in. So it's important to note that. But we're gonna pull from the origins because a lot of people are pulling from the comics even when they make the movies or the cartoons. There are still ongoing comics to this day. They're just not as maybe not as popular because there's just other mediums. So there's so the people we're comparing or that get compared to Malcolm and Martin are Professor X and Magneto. Professor X, also known as Charles Xavier, is a genetic scientist in the comics. His most powerful thing is he's a telepath, and he's the one that founds the X-Men, these group of superhuman mutants who fight mainly other mutants, but we'll get to that. But are supposed to fight for the defense of mutants. And he is known to have stereotypically, we'll get into the nuances of that, but he's known to have a more peaceful approach towards humanity because humanity obviously is scared in the X-Men comics. Humanity is scared or bothered by these mutants, people that have these special powers. So there's this antagonism going on. His approach to that antagonism was we should try to coexist with mutants for the most part, even though if you read some of the more recent comics, he actually did move in the other direction and they have like an island or something, but that's for nerd shit. But generally, whenever you hear the story, he wants to coexist with human beings. And then there's Magneto, whose power is he can control metal. He's also and he's written about differently too. So in the beginning, he's just a generic supervillain. Becomes more of an anti-hero and sympathetic, and then sometimes he's even a hero, but his ability is to generate and control magnetic fields. That means he can take metal and do anything he wants with it. He can take a bunch of metal, put it together, and he can fly. If you shoot bullets at him, he can literally just catch the bullets with his brain and throw them back at you. You can take the gun out your hand. Anything with metal, it's a wrap. You're not beating it.
For the nerds who love science, there's metal in everything. In the earth and all over the place. And so it's really almost unfucking stoppable.
Yeah.
That might have been one of my favorite scenes in the movies when he pulled the metal out of old boy and
the bloodstream.
Yeah,
bloodstream. Yeah.
Sit your ass down.
What could it be?
What are you doing?
There it is. Too much iron in your blood.
But it's important to note again, he was in a all plastic prison. That was like the trick.
Bro, he just walked out. He just floated out.
So he founded the Brotherhood of what was originally called Evil Mutants, which is a point we'll get to later. That eventually is then changed to just Brotherhood of Mutants, and that is like they're like the opposition. He is the antagonist of the comics. So we come back to the real world. Martin Luther King, I don't think I need to say much, but for those who might be confused, he was a Baptist minister, a Black radical philosopher, and the most prominent leader of the Civil Rights Movement. He was also the founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's known for I Have a Dream speech. I need not really explain much of this, but we know that his main ideological position was advocating for nonviolence, and he advocated for integration. But over time, he grew more critical of the American empire. So he evolved. He was assassinated at April 4th, 1968. And then there's Malcolm X, my favorite out of all of these people, of course, Muslim minister, revolutionary, Pan-Africanist, human rights activist, and he emerges as a leader within the Nation of Islam, the spokesperson of the Nation of Islam. led by Elijah Muhammad. He eventually leaves the Nation of Islam, forms his own organizations, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, Organization for Afro-American Unity. He advocated for self-defense and separation from whites, but later modified his position on working with whites and anyone else to defeat American imperialism. But he never stopped being a Black nationalist. It's important to note that. And you know, he is considered like the forefather of Black power. Like it was much of his thought that gives rise to what people call the Black Power movement. He was assassinated on February 21st, 1965. So that's for those who don't know anything, that's to give y'all a little breakdown of what we're going to be talking about. So just to give you examples of the myth, because again, you may have never heard this one. There's history.com. Put this on the screen. History.com. History.com also, if you're a teacher, don't let your students cite history.com. They never have any fucking sources on the website. I don't understand. History.com is so useless to me, but they literally call themselves history.com off the History Channel. And they have put, you know, they have an article called How Stan Lee's X-Men were inspired by real life civil rights heroes. And we're going to get to how Stan Lee be bullshitting on this part. So they talk about the metaphor extended to characters themselves. Professor X and his vision of harmonious human mutant coexistence, standing for Martin Luther King, Martin Luther King Jr., while Magneto's rigid attitudes toward the defense of mutant kind reflect the philosophy of Malcolm X. And it's always cast as like Malcolm's beliefs were a little bit more not just radical, but just unrealistic and practical and driven by anger and hatred. So there's that. And then there is what else we have here? So history.com, there's a picture, mind-blowing facts or mind-blowing on Twitter that has like almost 1 million followers, posted about how, you know, it's literally a page about mind-blowing facts that we were joking about earlier. And they were like, hey, did you know Martin Luther King and Malcolm X they based the X-Men characters off of them? And then, you know, it's been talked about. Stan Lee himself was asked in a Rolling Stone piece back in 2018, were you aware that Professor X is more like MLK and Magneto is more like Malcolm X? Was this a conscious projection there? This is a question by Rolling Stone. And they were like, he said, I think it certainly was an unconscious feeling, and I never felt Magneto was 100% bad. I mean, there are reasons why he felt that way, but it was just up to Professor X to find a way to make him understand that he was on the wrong track. So they're always like admitting that Malcolm is wrong and Martin is right. This is the inherent bias, like even as they perpetuate a myth. And again, Stan Lee we'll get to it a little bit more later, but he was on bullshit because it's kind of like when you go to how he originated the characters, there was no like sympathy for Magneto originally. He was just a crazy guy. There was another question. Also, right metaphor ended up being a defining metaphor. X-Men, did that come along in the first issue? He said, I came along the minute I thought of X-Men and Professor X. I realized I had a metaphor, which is great. It was given to me as a gift because it made the stories more than just a good guy versus bad guy. Again, he's just bullshitting because like we'll get to it.
It was given to me as a gift. This is giving. People thought Angela Davis was a Black Panther, and instead of correcting them, she was just like, "This sounds great. I'm gonna run with it."
Good comparison. This is definitely giving that though.
I didn't think that, but if y'all niggas like it, then I'll get Black readers.
Cause it's like, bro,
it definitely feels like it's on the spot. Like, yeah, that's a great idea.
Because it doesn't make sense. Like when you read it, it's just kind of like
I'm not even mad at him, low key.
He's like, he literally said,
I mean, if that's what you think.
It was unconscious.
Right, Kim. Like, is that what you think? I mean, sure, yeah. It was based off of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X.
It was unconscious, but you know, I had an example and I went with it. It's like, all right, bro. So yeah, he's bullshitting. So we'll get to more so why later, but in a little bit. But yeah, so then there's this interview. I'm gonna put this on the screen because I'd rather it be said than me read it. So this is Michael Fassbender and Ian McKellen, they play Magneto in various X-Men movies. So for those who know, but there was X-Men 1, 2, and 3, and then there was a prequel set, and that starts with X-Men First Class, then Days of Future Past, then the one on Apocalypse, then the one on, I don't even want to mention that one, but the one on Phoenix. But so anyway, there's like different timelines for those who have not seen these. So there's an old Magneto, and then there's a young Magneto. And they had the actors sit down and talk about their experience.
The comic book series or anything. I guess you agree that he does nothing really for his own games. That's what that's. Yeah. People say he's a villain. I think that's very simplistic. And in the history of all the civil rights movements, and I've been involved in the gay civil rights movements, there's always a divide. There's always an argument between how do we go about making our lives better. The Professor X's way, which I rather team standing up for yourself, but explaining yourself, wanting to be part of society, or do you rather withdraw and get rather violent, as say Malcolm X figure would be? Absolutely.
So again, there's this built-in bias, and these people more so just don't know what they're talking about. We'll get to that. There's a lot to get to here, but again, they promote. Again, this isn't promotion for the film. So like I said, they promote this idea while poorly representing who Malcolm X is, and even Dr. King as well. Honestly, both of them. So that was Ian McKellen, who was involved in the gay rights movement and seems to think that you can just draw a straight line to the civil rights movement and every other kind of movement. So there's fan art. I'll just put that on the screen. And for people who are listening, there's fan art online that basically like puts Professor X or puts Martin Luther King in, because Professor X also was paralyzed from waist down in the comics for most of his life, or not most of his life, part of his life. So there's a picture for those listening that has Martin Luther King in a wheelchair that flies, and has Malcolm X, standing behind him in the Magneto suit. Or here's another one where Malcolm X has on the Magneto helmet, and he's putting out the hand that Magneto would put out to control metal, and Martin Luther King in a wheelchair. There's several pictures of this. Again, for those listening, you can watch this on the channel formerly known as BPM, and you can see it on there. And then, so yeah, that's just to get our sense of just as far as we ain't making this up. Like, this is out there. The characters in the movie say it. The fucking creator of the comics tries, makes shit up on the spot. Like, yeah, it was an unconscious decision. It's promoted in just kind of general pop culture, and there's a lot of other examples, but we don't bog you down with all those examples. So what really happened? Like, what is the actual origins of this story? So again, the X-Men were invented or created in 1963, September of 1963. 1963 is an interesting year. Before we can get to the comics, like, that's the year that Kennedy was killed. That's the year of the Birmingham. That's the year of the Birmingham riots. The year that Birmingham was desegregated. That's the year that Medgar Evers was assassinated. That is the year of the March on Washington, that Malcolm actually calls the farce on Washington. That is the year that the 4 little girls were bombed in a church. And that is also the year that Malcolm X gives, I think, his greatest speech message to the grassroots. So it's an interesting year. So also, it's important to think about, if they're comparing them to these people, this is like happening in real time. And often we now have this Malcolm Martin comparison that happens. Martin Luther King didn't show up on the scene a superstar, neither did Malcolm X, as far as being super well known. So 1963 is really the year that, like, Martin Luther King gives the march, or the I Have a Dream speech in 1963. That's when he becomes like the big deal. He was well known up to that point, but that's when it was really consolidated around King. He gets the Nobel Peace Prize, like, I think the next year. So this idea that they based those two characters off of them in 1963, when they were they had just been in public, like Malcolm had only been in like the public sphere for about 4 years, I believe, when the Hate to Hate Produce came out. It's hard to believe that two Jewish white guys were that well versed in their 20s that they would be able to break down these two gentlemen while real-time events are literally happening. like it just doesn't hold up. But so September 1963, that is literally a month after, like, the March on Washington was, I believe, August 28th, 1963. So this comes out that next month. So, you know, they would usually run 4 comics a month at the time. Or no, they would run 2. They would run a comic a month, but then, yeah, it was 1 comic a month, not 4. Sorry. So the first comics, for those who are comic book heads, only have 5 X-Men. It was Cyclops, Marvel Girl, which we know is Jean Grey, Iceman, Angel, and Beast. And then obviously Professor X. It was very different than what it is today. I would say that it wasn't a very interesting comic book. I read it for this episode, but something that and I want Ryan to read these comic books in his comic book voice. But like but so it's something in the actual comic book itself is this where they kind of state their ideologies on top, and it kind of gives you a sense to tell me if either one of these are Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, just based on maybe a cursory understanding of what you know. So there is a clip from Professor X expressing his, like, what their general mission is, and then if Ryan, if you want to read that, and then we'll go to the Magneto one.
Gotcha. Not all of them want to help mankind. Some hate the human race and wish to destroy it. Some feel that mutants should be the real rulers of the earth. It is our job to protect mankind from the evil mutants.
Okay, so
that's supposed to be MLK.
That's supposed to be MLK. Our job is to protect mankind from the evil mutants. So that's like Martin Luther King saying, our job is to protect white people from the evil niggas. Like, you just translate it. That would be equivalent to like, if I'm saying that is the stated goal in the first comic, that we have to protect mankind from the evil mutants. Martin Luther King, even at his worst, never said anything like that. Like, I can, so Martin Luther King, will get to, confronted power. He did spend his time trying to protect, white people from the evil. He never said anything like that or implied it. But then we have Magneto, who sounds even more, out there. So Ryan, if you want to share, read that.
I read your outside the typical lunatic villain. The human race no longer deserves dominion over the planet Earth. The day of the mutants is upon us. The first phase of my plan shall be to show my power, to make Homo sapiens bow to the Homo superior.
Yeah, that's real Malcolm X. That's giving real Malcolm X vibes right there.
Close. Malcolm was not trying to have niggas take over the world. He just wanted us to be free and not be fucking beat up and murdered and jailed every day of the week. He wanted us to realize that we were better than this and that we deserve better. And we should make, if they're not gonna give it to us, we should make it for ourselves and make sure they can't fucking take it away.
Yeah. So the human race no longer deserves dominion over the planet Earth. If someone translates that to white people, I would agree. Yeah. I don't have any problems.
You did your big one there.
The day of the mutants is upon us, but then the first phase of my plan should be to show my power to make Homo sapiens bow. So Malcolm was never. This is a myth that white people make up. There aren't any real, like, black nationalists or black radicals in general whose goal in the end, any serious one, is to make white people bow to us. That's not a goal. We want our own power. Leave us alone. Now, if you won't leave us alone, we'll go on the offensive. But the point is not, like, to make them bow or to take, like, again. So this whole approach, So anyway, we'll get to more.
I'm glad you made that. I'm glad
you
made that distinction. The serious black radicals, Black revolutionaries, not the not the
not the niggas who think
intellectual.
not the niggas who think fucking white girls is reparations or anything silly.
nothing
not
like
that.
that.
Yeah, we're not talking about those people.
Now, granted, every Juneteenth, when they post that picture of these white people picking cotton and the niggas with the whips, I click repost because it's fucking hilarious.
Oh, it's funny. Yeah, of course. We just know we're laughing and we're not actually making that's not a real So anyway, this is the original creation. Again, people may know, as we'll get to, that Magneto was like a Holocaust victim. None of this appears in the original comics. That's later, so we'll get to that. So there's no backstory. Magneto has no backstory. So the original, again, to set this up, the original kind of breakdown is the X-Men are here to protect humans against the evil mutants, and then the evil mutant is Magneto and his brotherhood of, they literally are called the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. So they call themselves that. So if that's supposed to be the Nation of Islam, have fun with, again, these comparisons. It doesn't mean that the Nation of Islam didn't preach. Like, there is literally a clip of Malcolm saying, I'll put it in the edit.
They call Mr. Muhammad a black supremacist because he teaches you and me not only that we're as good as the white man, but better than the white man. Yes, better than the white man. You are better than the white man. And that's not saying anything. That's not saying, you know where just to be equal with him. Who is he to be equal with? You look at his skin. You can't compare your skin with his skin. While your skin look like gold beside his skin.
But the point wasn't so he could like put everybody in chains. It was just like, yo, we're not, like, his point was, who are white people to be compared to? Even in saying that,
you have no moral high ground.
So, and understanding the context as well, that in that time, black people were psychologically destroyed. So someone who came along and said, you're the original people and you're gods and all that has a certain, that uplifts you in a way, that we don't live in. We definitely have our shit today, but we don't live under that level of psychological damage in terms of just who we are as black people in the way that we were living back then. You couldn't even be called black back then. It was an insult to even be called black back then. So to compare that to Magneto's insult. Go ahead, my bad, Terrell.
Came through and condemned white people. Said, if there's ever a true devil on this earth, it is white man.
I mean, and he didn't even know that y'all was gonna end up being on the internet telling people that you don't wash your fucking legs or use wash rags. Like, there are days where I just be in this head of mine when I see foolish shit, and I just be like, "Ooh, child." I'm glad some of my elders and ancestors were not here to see the stupid shit y'all be saying.
Yeah.
No, I concur.
Yeah. So
Jesus.
So the X-Men ran from 63 to 1970 for about 66 episodes. It wasn't, I keep saying episodes, 66 issues. It wasn't a very popular like comic book, and it actually was discontinued briefly. Some of the fans got mad, wrote in, they put it back out, but they just kept, basically, if we're going to use the episode analogy, they just ran reruns. They just reprinted the same comics from like comic 66 to like when we get to comic 94, because it wasn't a very engaging story. I did read a lot of the beginning ones for this episode. It's not very enjoyable. They're not you get about a good story every 10 comics or so. It's not the most moving shit. And again, this is not the Magneto that, for those of people who do know about Magneto or even know about Professor X, these are not really the characters that you might know through the movies. They didn't have a lot of depth, is not nearly as much depth as they ended up getting later on. So in 75, again, there was also, like I said, there was no Wolverine, there was no Storm, none of those people. There were just no black or even so-called minority characters for about 12 years. We'll talk about that too. So now that, in 75, now Malcolm and Dr. King have been assassinated, there's more of a public memory of them. So now people start making these comparisons, you know, that they weren't making in 1963 when this first happened. So the giant size X-Men, it was just a one run thing, and that's how you get Nightcrawler and Wolverine and Storm and Thunderbird and Sunfire and Colossus, and that's where you start getting the quote unquote diversity that X-Men now likes to celebrate itself for. Up until then, everybody was white. So the first 12 years, everybody's white. There's also an interesting change where you used to buy comics in the stores, like when you were like you would see magazines today, and eventually there became comic book stores later on. And I was reading this piece that was making a point that that's part of why they think the diversity ended up being ushered in, because comic book stores don't have to appeal to as broad of an audience. So white people who didn't want to see any kind of black characters on the shelves in 1963, those kind of white people weren't going to be getting comics, because now you got to go get it at a comic store. So then Chris Claremont, 1975, he's the one that takes over as the main writer of X-Men. And this is where you start getting a lot of the stuff that we now know, whether it's the movies, whether it's the backstory. You know, it was a kind of a major like remake of the character. So he takes X-Men to a whole different level, and is what makes it popular in the kind of cultural sense that we come to understand it today. So he makes Magneto more of a sympathetic character, somebody who, even if you don't agree with his ends, you understand his means, which I think is how you write a good villain. Like, a villain's logic makes sense, even if you don't always agree with how they move forward with their logic. Like, you know, like we watch Dark Knight, we understand, like, the Joker makes really good critiques of society. I don't know if people agree with, like, you know, blowing up hospitals, but his critiques about rules and expectations that people have about certain people dying, you know, he makes some fair points.
You know what I noticed? Nobody panics when things go according to plan, even if the plan is horrifying. If tomorrow I tell the press that, like, a gangbanger will get shot, or a truckload of soldiers will be blowing up, nobody panics, because it's all part of the plan. But when I say that one little old mare will die, well, then everyone loses their minds.
Right? Like, regardless of what the blowing up of hospitals. So, you know, so Claremont starts reshaping those characters, particularly Professor X and Magneto, and he makes them friends. In the original comics, they weren't friends. Now they were like younger friends who grew apart and split based upon their ideological disagreements, right? And their tactical disagreements. And then he says Magneto is a survivor of the Jewish Holocaust, right? And that's part of why he's driven to be so raging, is because he doesn't want to ever have to go back to that. He doesn't want any mutants to have to go back to that. And that becomes the kind of the backstory. And that was in the X-Men versus in X-Men versus Magneto. This is a reveal. This is the 150th comic of the series. So again, in 150 comics, we didn't get no backstory of this man. And finally we get in that comic where he states, either you're with me or I'm going to kill everybody. I put that picture on the screen. That's when you finally get the story, when he ends up killing one of the mutants on accident, and he starts crying and he's holding her, Kitty Pryde. And then he's like, oh shit, I'm turning into the very people that, you know, I didn't intend to turn into. I'm turning into, I'll read it here. Orion, do you want to read it again? And this is the last one. I remember my own childhood.
I remember my own childhood. The gas chambers as Auschwitz, the guards joking as they herded my family into their deaths, as our lives were nothing to them, so human lives became nothing to me.
Yeah. So now, oh, he's hurt, right? That's the way he's hurt. It's his trauma. That's how they're selling it. But it took 150 episodes or 150 issues for us to get that story. Like, we didn't get that. So this idea that they were created, that was the origins. That's just, it just doesn't, again, it's not true. And then go ahead.
So it's not syncing up.
Nah. So Claremont, again, he's the one that gives them this depth. And again, I enjoy these comics. I think the writing is great. I'm just saying, like, but it just, Malcolm and Martin's not even then. Malcolm never, killed somebody and then held them in his hands. It was like, oh, I'm turning into the white people who, who killed my father or something. Like that's not a. So there's also this narrative that, oh, you're gonna turn into the people that you hate so much, like like
Yeah, it's like on one side they were making this comparison as it was as a backhanded compliment. It's like, oh yeah, this is true, but also both of these characters had like really problematic traits to them, and so it's like, are you then going to weaponizing this to say that this is why y'all are afraid of Black people? Because do you think that this is what we're going to be? And we see that through, and that's a running theme throughout X-Men regardless, is that these mutants, these people with all of these powers, must be contained, must be controlled. And for those who like watch movies and see as it gets further down of like the military and all step in, and it's like either we can use y'all or y'all can get the fuck out of Dodge, because of this very thing. And so this was never going to be something that was going to be good for us. And that's another reason why this myth needs to be debunked, because we don't need people still walking around saying this foolishness.
No, not at all. I mean, it's kind of like a peek into how white pop culture really views our figures, really views our radical and revolutionary figures. I mean, I think, like I said earlier, the flattening of them, but also the mischaracterization of them. Like, obviously, like Cam said, the backhanded compliment, the fact that you even compare Malcolm X to a villain like Magneto.
And in their interviews, like they were saying it without saying it anyways. Like, oh yeah, I can 100% see how like folks would think this related to them, and a lot of it is bullshit, but a lot of it also really showed their own thoughts and fears of us as a people.
And it kind of rings similar to how even the Black Panthers are portrayed in a lot of Hollywood. Very senseless, very cultish, very buffoonish. Like there's no deep ideological depth to them. In the same way with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, these are full people, very complex men, and they have very well thought out political ideologies and how to approach trying to achieve liberation and freedom for Black people. And the comparison to these characters, these comic book characters, don't do it justice at all.
Plus, y'all giving two white men credit for being able to think that deep is just wild. And in reality, the actual inspiration was far more fucking insidious to begin with.
So, like Cam was saying, that's why I set up with the Palestine thing. Like Cam was saying, like these characters are actually based off Israeli Jews, which I did not know coming into this. I knew all this other shit I kind of knew, but I didn't know that
wow.
And it's really weird. It's fucked up timing considering where we're at with Israel in this moment. But yeah, like so Claremont, again, the guy who kind of rewrites them to be more complex and to be a little bit more interesting much more interesting than they were under Stan Lee's version. He said, quote, in a interview with Empire, on Empire Online, it's like a comic book place or just a place, not just comic books, movies, all that geek shit, right? He says, there's a lot of talk online now that Magneto stands in for Malcolm X and Xavier stands in for Martin Luther King. He said, which is totally valid, but for me, being an immigrant white, Claremont was born in England, to make that analogy felt incredibly presumptuous. So even he thinks that analogies don't really hold up. But he's an equivalent analogy could be made to Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin as Magneto. I don't know if I said his name right. Evolving through his life from a terrorist in 1947 to a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize 30 years later. Okay, I never do this, but I botched these men's names. So the name is Menachem Begin, not Menachem Begin. You will hear me say it wrong throughout the episode, but so it's Menachem Begin. I probably got other things wrong, but at least want to correct that. So he's saying that Magneto is actually, and we'll get into who Biggin was, but he was actually based upon one of the Israeli Jews who took Palestine from the Palestinians and used terrorist actions to do so, and then eventually becomes a Nobel Prize winner because he became a prime minister over Israel. Which, so I don't think he ever stopped being a terrorist. If you're prime minister over Israel, you're more of a terrorist than you were when you started. But you know, so so and then that's Magneto. But then in another article I was reading, they said actually Claremont says he always saw Professor X and Magneto as echoes of David Ben Gurion and Menachem Begin. So David Ben Gurion is the first prime minister of Israel. Just to give y'all a sense. So let's deal with, so Professor X is supposed to be David Ben Gurion. David Ben Gurion is the Zionist leader of the Jewish Agency. That was the Jewish Independence. So they were before the Zionists actually took over Palestine from Palestinians and pushed out the British, because there was a British mandate. Britain was over Palestine from 44 to 48. There was the group that was trying to get quote unquote Jewish independence in Palestine was called the Jewish Agency. This is who they're saying Professor X is being compared to. This is they consider one of the founding fathers of Israel. He united the Jewish militias into what we now know as the Israel Defense Force, otherwise known as the IDF, who is currently dropping bombs as we speak in Palestine. This is what led to the expulsion of Palestinians, what we know as the Nakba. And again, he was the first prime minister of Israel. So that is who Claremont, who wrote these comics, is compared, who he actually sees Professor X
as a demon. A demon who I hope is burning in hell. Every single one of his descendants also burn in the fire pits of hell. Then it was like Magneto is also based off somebody else who is equally as fucking disgusting and
maybe
evil.
even a little worse.
Yeah, far worse. I mean,
this
all the Zionists are trash, but like this was a special demon.
Yeah. So like, this dude was considered too far right for the popular movement that was happening among Zionists. That's how, like, they were like, bro, you're going too far. We're killing. so he was a right-wing terrorist leader. This is Menachem Begin, the one that he compares Magneto to. He was a leader of a group called Irgun. Irgun did what's called the Disir Yassin massacre that killed at least 107 Palestinian Arab villagers, including women, children, and carried out together on April 9th, 1948. So he was conducting like terrorist attacks against Palestinians because they didn't think that the Jewish Defense Force was going far enough. So they wanted to go further. Because he was the right-wing side. They were the liberal Zionists. He's the right-wing Zionist. So he becomes the sixth prime minister of Israel, and that's when the right-wing party took over. And he founded the party, I think it's pronounced Likud, or Likud, and that party is the party that Netanyahu currently leads today, just to give people some context.
Another fucking demon.
So, but this man won a Nobel Peace Prize. That's how y'all know Nobel Peace Prizes aren't really serious prizes.
No.
I mean,
it's full of shit.
Barack Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for what's called the Camp David Accords. They struck a peace deal with Egypt. And then he also led the Lebanon War, which, you know, among many things, there was a 2-day massacre in 1982 between 1,300 and 3,500 civilians, mostly Palestinians and Lebanese, in the city of Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War. 1,300 to 3,500 civilians were killed, in a 2-day process. So that's who Magneto's supposed to be. But he sees it, again, in his quote, he thinks it is a positive arc that Magneto goes from being a terrorist to being the kind of like leader of the state of Israel, or the leader of a state. Because if you read the comics further, and they did this in the newest cartoons, where Magneto or Professor X they thought was dead, Magneto comes and says, I'm going to be the leader of the X-Men, and he kind of tampers down and tries to follow Professor X's quote unquote dream. but he's comparing this to Israel. Now he's probably just one of those, Zionist Jews that never really criticized Israel and clearly lost the plot. And then lastly, on that character, on that individual vision, he advocated for the expansion of Israel settlements in West Bank and Gaza. So he's one of the first people to like push settlements in Gaza and in the West Bank past just like 1967 borders. So we're dealing with that today, right? So that's who these guys are actually based off of, on the writer that really brings them to life. Not Malcolm X.
Nothing could be farther from Martin and Malcolm.
But comparing them to Martin and Malcolm, shit.
Yeah.
Comparing Martin and Malcolm, like, ugh, that's doing them.
I actually would have preferred it had it been what everybody assumed it had been. But then it goes back to like, and I mean, y'all have read the comics that like when you then reread the whole story, or even as a movie watcher, and then like you rewatch the movies, knowing this, it's like you feel disgusted that these are people that in a lot of ways you rooted for.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get to this in a minute, but like there's also this idea, this is the problem when like the Jewish challenges that people have are just compared flatly to Black challenges. And that's what a lot, because again, Stan Lee, this isn't about anti-Semitism. Nobody's being anti-Semitic, but these literally the writers were Jewish. Like that's just what they said it themselves. So there's an attempt to try to draw correlations that aren't really there or are just poorly constructed, like we were talking about at the beginning. So, in a way, when you think about it from the perspective of Israel, then in a way, it actually makes sense. It makes sense why their struggle is what it is, because one is literally saying, let's assassinate or let's just genocide everybody. And that is one side of Zionism. Let's just destroy all of them.
It's Zionism in a nutshell.
Right. And then there's another side of Zionism that says, let's never really treat them fair, but we can coexist with them, but it's still our shit. That isn't actually a conflict amongst Zionists. So that conflict actually makes more sense than anything between a Malcolm or Martin, that's what's being expressed in the story, because liberal Zionists and right-wing Zionists have their own beef right now. That's part of why Netanyahu's going so hard beyond what he even needs to do, because he understands he's not very popular and the more liberal Zionists could take power. But the right-wing Zionists have had power pretty much since the the person that Magneto's been compared to, I think he got in office in 1977. They've been running the government. But when Israel was first taken over, it was actually a liberal, like politically, it was a liberal government. And then in 1977, it became a more right-wing government. And their plan is more just total, like genocide, total, like wipe away the Palestinians from existence. So now it actually makes more sense, like way more than Malcolm and Martin. It actually holds up way better as an analogy.
And of course, it makes sense that from a propaganda perspective, when the movies started to come out, that they would then gas this comparison even more, because they can't come out and be like, actually, these two characters are based off of my disgusting genocidal Zionist idols. And so, of course, then when the movies are coming out, nor do I think they would have got a lot of the actors to want to fuck with the movie to begin with.
No, they could never say the quiet part out loud. You want me to play this?
Of course not. And so it makes sense that like when you watch interviews with folks who were in the movies, and even when we saw that he was initially saying, yeah, okay, somebody said that, and it came to me. This is how I saw it, as a way to gas it, and to just roll with it, because that actually is better than what came from it as a whole. And so then all of your actors can feel like they are a part of this story that is complex, that is nuanced, that has a larger premise that people can then feel like, even if it's unrealistic, that they can relate to in some pieces.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's like the liberal Zionist perspective. I don't know if, to be fair, I'm not saying literally everybody in the universe that's ever done X-Men is aware of this. They probably don't even know. I don't even think the actors, all of them, even know. But that I'm saying that's the world that Claremont was building. Even though I enjoy the comics, and many of us enjoy the X-Men stories. When you sit back and look at it, it actually makes more sense that this is an internal Zionist conflict more than this is anything that has to do with niggas.
Right.
It's just so. This is a clip from the movie, the first X-Men movie that ever came out, and this is at the end, and this is between Magneto and Professor X, and again they're still gassing this, Malcolm X angle.
This plastic prison that will hold me forever. War is still carrying charms, but I intend to fight it. By any means necessary. I will always be there. Old friend.
I never noticed he knocked the chess piece over. You mad, bro? but yeah, so they gassed that, and I mean, there's more, but even in the first class, the X-Men First Class, the origin stories of X-Men when they showed them younger, both Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy are thinking about it from the standpoint of the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King thing and the different approaches. Even though Michael Fassbender admitted he never studied anything about Malcolm X, so just once again,
Worse.
so so anyway. That's that. So again, when we walked into this, I knew that the originals weren't based on it. I knew they added the story to Magneto. I did not know about the Zionist thing though. That was new information. I didn't even know. I knew they were written by Jews, but I don't inherently believe that's a bad thing or anything. So I just was like, all right, some white Jewish guys, whatever. I didn't know that it was that there was Zionist propaganda, whether it's intentional or not. Because again, Claremont was pretty open about it. Because again, they don't think there's anything wrong with Israel. That's the thing about a lot of these Zionists. A lot of these folks are brainwashed, so they don't see it. Especially, I think that interview was in 2023 before October 7th. No, that interview was in 2016, I believe. So that's a little older. So they just think it's just Israel. But again, the liberal Zionists think they can live with Palestinians. It's just that what they did is they turned upside down, and then they use these Holocaust analogies to make mutants out to more so appear as victims. But again, that's how Zionists see that. They think that what do you hear them say? Israel is the safest place for Jews in the world, and all of this shit. And we're not safe anywhere. If we're not safe in Israel, we're not safe anywhere. So there's this thing where the Zionist propaganda teaches that the whole world is against them. So they do see themselves as mutants in that sense that they're under attack by the rest of the world, and the Palestinians, the Arabs, the brown people particularly are a problem for them, and they want to kill them. This is the Zionist narrative, So here we are.
What was it? X-Men? Is it X-Men 97 that's out now, or what is it?
Yeah.
I haven't got to watch it yet, but now I'm watching that a little bit different. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah. I live to kill joy.
I'm glad you're finally admitting it. Thank you.
I'm gonna be watching that with
if you want some more messed up information, this is more about an individual, but the director of X-Men, the first two films, and X-Men, he was the producer of X-Men First Class, and the director of Days of Future Past, Bryan Singer, who's also Jewish, is bisexual. So they also use the queer analogy, which I got no beef with that. But you learn that Bryan Singer is also pedophile, sexual. He's a rapist. Like, he actually has been kicked out of Hollywood since 2019 because of these actions. Like, that's why Phoenix was partially so bad, because he wasn't allowed to finish the movie. So they just kind of put it out. So just another, not a fun fact, but just another fact. So yeah. But again, just for these corporate things, they get swept up, and we're all caught up in the story, and they doing all this. So anyway, some people will hear everything we said and still be like, yeah, I hear you, but the analogy, the allegory still holds up. Like it's still real though. Like, yeah, I mean, there might be that, but you know, like somebody's still gonna say that. So we're gonna deal with the allegory, then we're gonna be done. Because I don't think that holds up either. I think it's just as bad as the facts that we just went over. So there's like 5 points I want to make, and y'all could definitely jump in on these. So the very first one, I think it's a very simple, basic point as to why this comparison does not hold up. Because Professor X and Magneto are fucking white. They're white. They're not black. They're white. So right there, it just falls apart for me. They're white. Therefore, the experience is not going to be the same. You can't put white people in a black world and just try to make some kind of political, ideological connections. They're white. So they can walk around, you know, in their world much differently than, you know, Malcolm or Martin ever could. So trying to compare two white guys to two black guys in a political sense is usually not a good idea. Just saying. So you got crackers writing about crackers. That cannot be an allegory to black men. Again, like I said earlier, it was 12 years until X-Men even had any people of color, quote unquote. The world's totally different. Professor X himself in the story lived in a wealthy mansion in Westchester, New York. I don't see how that's Martin Luther King. You know, so
talk about it.
That's just one.
You didn't hear about Martin Luther King's mansion in Atlanta? You didn't hear about that? He had a Rolls Royce and everything.
Ah, man, yeah, you know, civil rights money was coming in.
Civil rights money was lucrative.
You know,
what a business. Let's not talk about these fake activists now making.
Yeah,
won't go there. But anywho,
yeah. So they're white. And that really should be the end of the conversation. But we got more. But like, so the nonviolence thing doesn't make sense. So in the comics, like I was talking to Ryan about this, it does not make sense. The X-Men is literally a paramilitary group. They have a thing in the bottom of the basement of the house that's in the mansion in Westchester, New York, called the Danger Room, where they go train to fight. In the very first comic, that is what they're doing. They are training to go fight the evil mutants. Martin Luther King did not train anybody to fight. Martin Luther King was a non-violent. That's what he was about. Now you don't have.
He was training people to not fight,
yeah.
literally.
So how
and
are they?
I believe Martin Luther King even said that even if everybody in the world around him turns violent, he will still be a pacifist.
He literally opposed a whole war.
Marvel at those who ask me why I'm speaking against the war. Could it be that they do not know that the good news was meant for all men, for communists and capitalists, for their children and ours, for black and for white, for revolutionary and conservative? Have they forgotten that my ministry is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for them? What then can I say to the Viet Cong, or to Castro, or to Mao as a faithful minister of this one? Can I threaten them with death, or must I not share with them my life?
I mean, the Vietnam War was horrific to begin with, but he also was like, this is unacceptable because we should not be going overseas and harming anybody. And I agree then, agree now. Well, I wasn't here then, but I agree with what he said then.
Yeah,
exactly.
So the idea that one had a peaceful approach and one had a violent approach, like we hear Ian McKellen. No, both of you have violent approaches. It's just, you know, Magneto wants to kill humans. Y'all want to kill mainly mutants, unless you're attacked. So if any movie you watch, the X-Men fight, they don't like stand up and get beat up at restaurants to desegregate lunch counters. That's not what the X-Men do. Say what? What'd you say? Are you cut up?
I said they was with the shits. They gonna pull up and bump.
Yeah. So, you know, that just doesn't hold up. Like y'all said, he opposed Vietnam. So then we get to this like it's like a revolutionary violence versus reactionary violence. So like they make Magneto out to be a sympathetic reactionary. He's somebody that was traumatized and hurt, by the Holocaust, which is totally understandable. And therefore, that's why he acts this way. Again, they kind of telling themselves because, again, we come back to the Zionist point, we're seeing like, oh, y'all are acting like the Nazis. So it's like,
forever trying to say that the Holocaust will never happen again, but the Zionists be outside doing the exact same fucking thing. And from what we've been seeing and hearing, even worse. Disgusting.
Yeah. So there was one other comic, God Loves, Man Kills. Now that one I admit was a graphic novel. That one was really good. As far as just like the storyline was entertaining. There was a
nerd.
But it was like but there was like they have a televangelist who's like wants to kill off all the mutants. If anyone's seen the X-Men 2, it was Stryker, but in that movie he wasn't like a pastor. But in the comics he's like a pastor. He wants to kill off all the mutants, and he actually takes Professor X hostage, and it's Magneto who actually saves the day, right? And Professor X gets so low that he actually says, maybe my dream was wrong, right? Because they're playing off Dr. King. They're actually playing into it, and it's Claremont admits it. Maybe my dream was wrong, and I should, maybe Magneto had a point. And there's a part where he actually reaches his hand to Magneto, and then at the very end, he takes it away. And he's Cyclops is like, no, you told us to believe in this. We're gonna stick with human beings. We're gonna support them. And Magneto is like, you're a fool. So it's like they so even when Magneto actually saves the day, they still are like, nah, you wrong, bro. We gonna stick with these human beings, whoop de whoop. So like even the way that comic book started was it was a telling back of it was a like a retelling of a story, and they talk about how again Magneto's still bitter from the Holocaust, and that's why he just can't get over it and all of that. Like that's Kitty Pryde is telling this story at the beginning of the comic. So yeah,
kind of similar to how black conservatives tell black people to get over certain shit.
But again, it's like we understand why you're mad, but we don't agree. That's not how you handle things. It's like right now, like we just lived through some so-called assassination attempt, and all these idiots get on TV and Twitter and online, and they're like, we denounce political violence as we're slaughtering people in Palestine. We denounce political violence, right? Exactly. No, violence is never the answer. So this is just the hypocrisy of America in general, where it's always denouncing violence while it's conducting
enacting.
Yeah. So, so the comic goes out of its way to denounce, even though both characters are violent, which is always funny though. That's why the Martin Luther King comparison is weird, because it's like, okay, but it's always denouncing a form of offensive violence that actually takes power. That's seen as wrong, so that has to be depicted as some kind of somebody who's bitter or doesn't actually have serious motivations, right? Again, they talk about Magneto as this, he's hurt. They said Eric's life is designed by the nightmare of his past, and sometimes he must fight and conquer. Like again, they're telling on themselves, so there's that. But I said Malcolm X is more than a black man driven by sympathetic but destructive rage of white people. And when he's depicted that way, it's disrespectful. Like, so his rage can be a positive thing, not something that's holding him back, that, doesn't allow him to see the full picture. Like, again, this just shows you how white folks think about us, even when they're trying to be sympathetic, how liberal white folks, specifically think about us. Because again, they're kind of telling on themselves and telling on how they feel about the more extremist Zionists, but they're also saying how they feel about us, So Malcolm X never murdered anybody. Also, like, they just never have. He never murdered anybody that we know of. Now,
I'm mistaken. He just advocated for self-defense.
Yeah.
Which is also a point when like they talk about how Magneto is depicted as this person who like has a point but goes too far in their methods. And it was like Malcolm X was not wrong in saying that Black people should know how to defend themselves, and that Black people shouldn't just take that shit lying down, that we should have our own businesses and be able to be self-sufficient in ways, because as we've already discussed, like to be completely self-sufficient is just not possible in this capitalistic society. But that type of ideology and that goal and that type of organizing is not going too far. It is saying that these, within the confines of the society that they were living in and that we still are living it within in a lot of ways today, we need to figure this shit out and not be defined by how they want to move.
Yeah. So it's like he was, again, as we know, they both evolved. Talking about King and X, both evolved in their thinking as far as like different tactics and different strategy, and just ideologically they both grew, both became more critical of capitalism in their own ways, But this idea that King is driven by this love for humanity, and Malcolm is just hateful, and he's just traumatized. Like that, the way that rage in and of itself is reduced to that, the way that Black rage specifically is reduced to that there's no powerful transformative nature to rage, that it's like something that's holding you down that you can't overcome. Again, that's the narrative I always push back against. It can be that, but it's not. But rage isn't inherently a bad thing. It's how you deal with it, right? So this idea that you have to remove it from you, it's like rage is still an act of love, depending on how you look at it, right? So that idea that you're just bogged down, and it's like, nah, like rage can be like, I'm mad if somebody killed any of y'all, I'm gonna be enraged. Oh, but it's not because I'm possessed and I can't see straight. It's like, no, I'm very clear that somebody needs to die because they hurt one of y'all. Like, I'm not confused about that. You know what I'm saying? So
That's not misguided. You're not
yeah.
going to find things. I mean, to the point where literally that they know, the feds know, society knows, the world at large knows that especially Black rage is a powerful tool that can be utilized for good, to the point where you wrote a whole book about it, about how they know that this can be utilized in a positive way and weaponize it and launder it from us for all of these through all these counter methods, specifically because they don't actually want to see these type of things come about in ways that could harm their bottom line. That's also a plug for the book. Go get the book. It's on all of our socials. It's on the Patreon. We talk about the book nonstop. Go buy the damn book.
And then the second to last point, we've already kind of said this, but much of the comics, maybe not as much of the comics, but definitely much of the movies are mutants. Like X-Men are fighting other mutants. Like, again, Martin Luther King may have disagreed with certain Black people, but he did not spend most of his time literally protesting and fighting other Black people. There's no evidence for this. But most of the time, the mutants, like we show in the very first comics, are set up as this thing where we have to prove that mutants are good and that we won't use our powers for bad. And the mutants who do, we need to prove that we oppose them. So like in the X-Men First Class movie, they actually have the mutants go work with the CIA to go and train with the CIA to then go fight the so-called bad mutants. Like that's how that movie actually works. And then Magneto realizes like, oh, these people ain't fucking with us regardless, so I'm leaving. He was actually about to throw all the nuclear missiles on both Russia and the United States, and he was stopped at the very end. But like the movie is based on like, oh, we're gonna work with the CIA, and Professor X is very tight with the government. I'm not saying Dr. King didn't have relationships in government either, but Professor X is way tighter than Martin Luther King. And Professor X is actually, in my opinion, much more comparable to Booker T. Washington, because he had a very assimilationist aspiration for much of the time that his characters existed. And he's also not really, another thing that's interesting, he had a separate school, right? So he wasn't really trying to like integrate, like he had a whole school just for mutants. They didn't go to school with everybody else. He was like, that's actually closer to like a Booker T or even a Malcolm. Malcolm said, we know we can't be any Black and white unity to this first Black unity. Like, it was like, no, we have to teach our own kids. So Martin Luther King didn't really advocate for separate schools or anything like that. That's actually Du Bois did, but so again, not really holding up. There's these people called the Morlocks in the comics. They were the mutants who you can't they can't hide themselves. Like they have very obvious, mutated looking faces. So a lot of mutants can quote unquote pass, if you want to use that analogy. So they lived in the sewers. And the X-Men fought them.
Yeah.
Scolded them.
Yeah.
And that's not just in the comics, that's in the cartoons. It's never made
The
into
most
the movies.
the most oppressed group of mutants,
Yeah.
the X-Men fought them on occasion.
Yeah.
A lot of times they would go
Trash.
down to the sewers to fight.
Yeah. Because the Morlocks would come up from the sewer because they was poor and they would steal shit and they would run back to the sewer and then X-Men would chase them down there. So
real quick, wouldn't it make more sense, like when you brought up the scene where Magneto turned weapons against Russia and the US, wouldn't it make more sense if that was compared to Malcolm X? Wouldn't Malcolm just keep the weapons to defend himself?
Yeah. Malcolm probably would have just taken all of them and been like, we're gonna hold these.
Like we're gonna go ahead and hold these.
And if y'all try us, we will shoot.
Like Malcolm's not about
Oh
to.
yeah, niggas shoot back. We just not gonna shoot first.
Yeah, Malcolm was a actual thinking individual with plans.
That's a good point.
Ideas.
There's a good point, Terrell. Why would you have the man literally had the power of I don't know how many nukes in his hand.
Yeah.
And he was gonna turn him and just blow him up. One, scientifically, you're not far from all these boats. So if you had blown up everybody, you would have killed yourself too. Like, so that was weird in and of itself. Like, you can't throw a bunch of if I'm on an island and I'm like 100 feet away from y'all and I threw a bunch of nukes on y'all, it's gonna kill me too. So, and all my mutant friends. So there's that. But anyway, like, yeah, if you got to control all these nukes, like, just take them. That's the thing.
Oh, I'm keeping these.
He didn't have to kill everybody. They could have just taken everything away from them and been like, look, y'all have no more weapons. We're gonna possess the weapons, like you said, and and we'll try to work towards peace. But if y'all keep coming at us, we can't help what might happen, as opposed to just destroying the whole world by blowing up a bunch of because setting off nukes kills way more people than just the people in that small vicinity. But yeah, it doesn't. But again, Malcolm doesn't get credit as being a thinker by these kind of folks. He's just mad. And Dr. King is never. And it's also so Dr. King was never mad. Dr. King never is enraged. Dr. King's always happy and go lucky and jolly. Like, that's also not fair either. So,
they don't assassinate niggas for just being jolly.
Nah. Like, come on, man. So, Martin Luther King said we integrate into a burning building here. So, yeah. Anyway, last
the struggles
point.
are also just not the same. Like,
it's not close, really. Last point. Ryan says at the beginning, it just flattens oppression. So it turns an inner Jewish conflict. And Jews also have, there's a kind of debate about whether to be more assimilated into society or whether to be more like openly out. And that's an issue that they've had, but that's different than ours because at no point can we pass, So you've had Jews in history who understandably changed their last names, so it didn't sound as Jewish because they didn't want to get, attacked, and totally get it. But, Terrell can be Terrell, Jackson, and he can change his name to
John White.
Yeah, and it does not matter when he walks outside. So it's just not the same exact thing. It just is what it is.
It's not even close.
Might help on a resume, but nah.
Yeah, but the moment you ask come to work, and there's did y'all see there's a guy who changed his name on the resume, got invited, and they didn't call him in. He changed his name. It's a black dude. They called him in, and then now they wouldn't give him the job, so he's suing the company because he proved it. Yeah. Like they said, there weren't any jobs available until he changed his name on paper.
See, that's a thinking black man right there. See?
Yeah. So it's just kind of like, so trying to compare, because it's vice versa, trying to compare, even our struggle to the Jewish struggle. It's not, because again, I'm not trying to knock anybody that's been through the Holocaust or anything like that. So I'm saying, like, but it's just not the same thing. I'm not looking to say one is worse than the other, or I don't really care. So if people feel that way, fine. I don't I don't take any pride in
This isn't the
in
struggle Olympics,
yeah,
as we
I
always
don't take
say.
any pride in dying more than the next group, personally.
Yeah.
But I do think that that deserves its own consideration. But and then Israel is nothing to strive for, right? So
Ever.
if that's what we're doing, that's not a thing that anybody should want to become. And again, this story kind of tells on itself, because I think really what you're watching is more the struggle between a liberal and right wing Zionist than you're watching a struggle between anything had to do with us. So yeah.
Evil versus evil is
Yeah.
what you're watching with this and reading and
Mhm.
absorbing, not anywhere near close to Black people striving for liberation
Not at all.
and agency.
After this, I'm not watching this shit for a while because I've just seen and watched and read way too much X-Men for any individual, so I'm good. But that's just because I'm tired of reading. But like,
Your X-Men tolerance has been maxed out.
yeah, I'm good. I've watched enough and read enough. But I'm saying if you want to read it or watch it, we don't. We're not here to say burn the comics and never go to a movie. It's just
I'm telling you that
know.
you should burn them and never go to the movies. Y'all won't catch me watching another X-Men movie. But there's I don't a lot of times these things, and we talked about this on my favorite episode to talk about breaking my heart on the wild game and nature wildlife reservations. It is just very difficult to recognize the level of violence and oppression that is fueling some of these things and still want to enjoy them. I don't think that everybody who does enjoy them is shitty. I don't think most people know that they're enjoying them is shitty, but it's really hard. And we talk about this all the time amongst ourselves when we're doing these myths of how once you know these things, like you can't unsee them. Like I couldn't go into watching another X-Men movie and not look for the parallels. Like if I were to watch another one again, it would be solely to see where this propaganda is being weaved in. And it would be with a completely different lens that would take away from me enjoying it. We talked about this a few weeks ago, me and Black, and how I could not enjoy the new Bad Boys movie because regardless of nostalgia, it is all police and military propaganda. And nothing about that is enjoyable to me.
Yep.
Nothing about that is
Propaganda.
okay for me. To see
Mhm.
two Black people specifically, not to say that there are not plenty of Black folks within the force that are taking part in our criminalization and oppression as a whole, but to take two people that are pretty prominent within culture so many years later and to essentially have a whole entire movie that is like why the police are great without any conversation or anything showcasing why this is unacceptable, even a whole montage that highlights somebody who was playing Call of Duty all day but also was in the military, which we know is a horrible parallel in itself, like saves the day. Like there was nothing in me knowing what I know now that could sit there through that for 2 hours and then like fully enjoy the movie. I watched it and I was like, great acting, great cinematography, directors did their thing. I hated this.
I get it. But don't worry, everybody. Everything we fixed with the Black Panther movie. There's no propaganda in that whatsoever.
Oh, don't get me talking about how much I hate
They
the
get
Black
everything
Panther
right.
movie.
Everything right.
Don't
There's a
do
Pan-African
it.
in this movie.
Don't do it. I fucking hate, especially the second one, man.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Wakanda was a wonderful place until they let white people in it, specifically the white feds.
That shit is
oh man.
But yeah, like it's important to note that a lot of these movies, not just X-Men, and I put that one when I talked earlier about the military, the U.S. military, the Army actually had an ad that was sequenced with X-Men First Class to recruit people. That was out of a broader article. I won't get too deep into it. That is about how the Department of Defense reads scripts and proves scripts that are about the military. And so and many of the Marvel movies that you've seen are based upon are approved scripts by the Department of Defense to make sure that they were represented properly. Like this is just what it is. Again,
even after the,
hey,
you
going
can
there
leave this in or take it out, but after that first Top Gun movie came out, they literally put military recruiting outside the movie theaters.
and it skyrocketed. Yeah, that was the one in 86. Yeah, it skyrocketed.
It's all propaganda.
You're telling the truth about us.
So yeah, there's a hell of a lot of movies that I'm gonna find a list. Like I have it somewhere here, but there's a lot of movies that were approved by the Department of Defense. Again, Cam says she's not gonna watch it. Totally understand. Some people might still watch it. That's up to you. But my thing is, if you're gonna watch these things, you should be clear what you watch it. That's always been my thing. I can't make people not watch things, but you need to know what you watch it. Because
So you're not continuously indoctrinated.
And these are these are movies that are a part of major franchises, man. Here's a list of movies that had their script approved by the Department of Defense. I won't read all of them, just a few. Transformers, all four of them, excuse me. Twister, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, King Kong, Karate Kid, Jurassic Park 3, James Bond series, Iron Man 1 and 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, I Am Legend, Godzilla 98, The Day After Tomorrow, Captain Phillips, Black Hawk Down, Battleship, Batman and Robin, Armageddon, Apollo 13, Air Force One. Just to give you a list,
And that's just a short list.
Yeah.
This just the list that gets talked about outside.
Yep.
Even if it doesn't have a stamp at this point, they have DoD consultants that come in to help write scripts or that look over the scripts to make sure that they're aligned, or somebody comes in with a red pen and says, can't write that.
Yeah, Zero Dark 30.
And think about think about how all those movies have in common. America's always seen as the good guy. Military is always seen as the good guy. Cops are always the good guys. They're always the one. And even if there are some bad cops, those are just the bad apples.
They're doing it for the greater good.
Yeah,
or doing it for the greater good.
Or they're bad apples. Yeah.
Or they started good and then they ended up evil, and it wasn't their fault.
There's no condemnation of the system. To the streets. Exactly. There's no condemnation of the system. There's no condemnation of imperialism, anything like that.
Wonder Woman 1984. Sorry, I'm just looking at the list. Top Gun, both of them, the new one and the older one. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't have time, but look into the connections between Zionists in Hollywood, Zionists specifically in the Marvel universe, and Zionists in Disney, and you'll find a lot of unsavory connections there. I mean, again, all movies are only made by 6 companies, so it's just Time Warner, News Corp, Sony, Disney, and what else am I missing?
Did you say Universal?
Viacom. Yeah. So, and Comcast, GE, General Electric. So yeah, that's it. That's NBC. That's Fox. That's Universal. That's Time Warner's DC. So watch what you want to watch, man. I don't care, but know what you're watching and know what goes into it, and just watch it. Like, just if you're gonna watch it, just watch it. But please don't come over our side with all these shitty analogies. Please stay over there, watch a movie, but don't come over here and try to make deep points. Stay over there. Please leave us alone. Like that'd be my thing with people, man. Like, you want to do your shit, bro? Go ahead. I don't care. But don't come to my side with, weak ass analogy and no. Stay over there. If you want to come to my side, come correct. But don't come over here with that shit, man. So you want to watch your shit? Go ahead. I don't give a fuck. But please stop with these. Man, that was deep. Like, nah, probably wasn't. It's just a movie. Like I watch them, probably gonna watch one when I get off here because I've been studying all day. But like I'm gonna go. I haven't caught up on House of Dragons. I'm gonna go watch that shit when I get off here, so Cam can stop texting me memes that I don't know nothing about because I didn't see the latest episode. So I'm not even hating. But me and Cam don't have deep conversations about how this is an anti-imperialist show and it's exposing the no.
These are two war criminals going at it. But I like House of Dragon because it's usually just white on white crime.
Yeah.
And minus, Corley's.
The dragons are really military vehicles. Military.
I mean, they make some fair points. I'm not saying there's nothing good. Like they make a nice analogy with how dragons could be seen as like nukes and shit like that. Like they make some fair points, but I like.
Well, dang, I just made that up top of my head. I didn't realize. Okay, well,
but I'm not saying X-Men. Even with that bad analogy, X-Men has some interesting messages here and there. I'm not saying it's all useless, but I'm just saying like it's not this. Like, don't compare these people to revolutionaries though. That's when you again stay over there.
Yeah,
you want to do your.
We just want to push the point that we've always been saying. Even entertainment deserves rigor. Black people deserve rigor. Our entertainment, our media that we delve into deserves rigor. That's it.
Yeah. Anywho, y'all have a great night. I hope this ruined X-Men for you and Team Black.
I really can't watch it. 7 now.
All right, peace.
Okay. Fresh out the plane in a whole nother state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them